Well, welcome everybody. My name is Jarrett Davis. I'm a social researcher and consultant that has been working on the issue of violence against men, boys, and gender diverse people over the last 10, 15 years. A lot of that work has been with Glenn Miles, who we'll be talking really soon. So Glenn and I have had continued work with Urban Light over the past nearly 10 years now, and we're have loved our work back with. We've worked with Alex, with Maya, with the whole kind of family, and we've also got Madeline Stenerson on this call, who we've been working with the last few years, and have been really gotten to know each other working on this project, and we're really excited to share it with you. So this is called Tell Them What Happened to Me. And I'll let, so I've introduced myself. I'll let, on the next slide, there we go. I'll let Glenn and Madeline and Maya, if you would like to introduce yourselves briefly as well.
So I can go next as Glenn unmutes himself. I'm Madeline Stenerson. I'm currently an assistant professor of psychology at St. Louis University, and I'm on the board of Urban Light. I started working with Urban Light several years ago now as an intern, and have really just kept in touch since then with their really amazing work in Chiang Mai and in Thailand in general. And then I got involved in the research because that's partially what I do, is I'm a researcher. So super excited to share the results of the project. Glenn?
Hi guys, I'm Glenn Miles. I've been really glad to be part of the team as well, and there's others in the team who won't be presenting today, but we couldn't have done it without their help. So thank you very much, everybody in the Urban Light team. You've been amazing. Thank you for Maya for making that possible as well.
Yeah. Definitely wanted to mention them. They're probably sleeping right now, but yeah, Tu, Rong, and Pan were excellent and have been flexible, and it's just been wonderful working with them as always. Moving to the next slide.
Glenn, Maya's here.
Maya. Okay. Sorry, Maya.
Sorry, I had my camera off for a second now. Hi everyone. I'm Maya. I'm Thailand director at Urban Light, and yes, most people in Thailand are sleeping right now. But I've been with Urban Light for about 4.5 years now, and also very excited to share the results of the research with you today, and looking forward to the discussion at the end, where I might be able to answer any questions you might have, or engage in some more discussion about what the research and the research findings mean for Urban Light going forward.
And just a quick note before going on to the next, is that this is the English launch of the research project. There was a Thai launch back in November. And so if you wish to have materials based on the research in Thai, we also have that available, if that's preferable. Yeah.
Okay, so we wanted to tell you about our journey together with Urban Light. It's been a really great journey, actually. It was a bit shocking today to realize it's actually 10 years in this journey. We basically, the way that we've worked in the first project was we were invited by Urban Light to help them to analyze what was going on in their context. They knew that there was a lot of young men who were working in the sex industry, but they didn't really know how to access many of them. They thought the ones that they had seen that were working, teenage boys in particular, that were working in the bars, there seemed to be less of them. And so they realized there was other ways in which they were being exploited. So the thing about the first project was that it was an extraordinary way of working together between researchers and NGOs. Usually NGOs, they can do their own reports and researchers tend to do their own research, but this was a really collaborative effort, and it was It was a really good effort because when we did the presentation, we had everybody from academics from Chiang Mai University. We had people from the TIP office. We had local social workers and health professionals, and we had a big cohort of other NGOs in Chiang Mai area. And we were just saying that when we presented before, we had a very lively discussion afterwards. And we even had members of the press who were there who were very interested in some of the outcomes, including Chiang Mai News and Rangoon Times and so on. So it felt like it was a very productive research. And we learned so much during that time on doing research with boys and young men. In the following research that we did to help my parents, we were able to find out more about children who were basically working on the street. And we believed, and the outcome of that research was that boys who are on the street are very vulnerable to being sexually abused and exploited and experience a high level of violence. And so we found that in other contexts and other situations around Southeast Asia as well. And so then this time our focus was initially on looking at online sexual exploitation, and you'll hear more about that soon. Now, initially the research project, the research reports that we did, we made them available to really aiming at the local research population. And then it wasn't until a little bit later that we've been able to get things published. And we have the first publication was the Boys for Bart research, which was published by Dignity Journal, which is an open access journal, and you're welcome to get to access that. We deliberately have made a point of trying where we can to get things published where they're easily accessible. The next publication that we're just waiting a publication for that, and that's in the Journal of Human Trafficking, and we're not sure where we will get this latest research published, but we'll see. So the need really for this research was that Chiang Mai is the largest city in northern Thailand, and so it's a hub for tourism and migration. Not just so we particularly there are a number of boys who've come from Burma into Chiang Mai, and then we really needed to find out whether find more evidence for the exploitation of boys and young men in Thailand. We wanted to see how the work of Urban Light had been, whether it had an impact with these young men, and also we wanted to know whether there'd been any impact of COVID-19. So one of the particular practical aspects of why we did the research was the urban team noticed that there were less boys in person at the outreach sites, so they wondered whether they had moved to online or whether it was because there was less exploitation. Next one, please. So the study aims to basically the aim was to understand and ultimately improve the local knowledge base of how boys, young men, and SOGIE-Diverse young people, that's LGBT young people in Chiang Mai, Thailand, engage in the sex trade and are vulnerable to sexual abuse and exploitation, including child sexual abuse and exploitation, both on and offline.
Yeah, so I can speak to this point, Glenn. And just a note too, for those who are unfamiliar with what Urban Light does. Urban Light is a NGO based in Chiang Mai, Thailand, who provides support and comprehensive services, as well as a drop-in center for boys and young men who are experiencing sexual violence, sexual abuse, and exploitation, as well as other people who are in need of specific services. So really, this was a the next step in the things that they were asking as they were doing their work. And we really do want to make clear, as we're about language and as we're talking about sex trade or trading sex or things like that, that a lot of some of the people who participate in this study are under the age of 18. Some of them are not. But when we are talking about people or children who are under the age of 18, they cannot consent to sex and they're not able to legally consent. And so any reference to them seeing customers or meeting up with customers or participating in sex trade is sexual exploitation and rape. And this is really even true when it appears that the child is the one initiating, or maybe is like saying they go out to find customers. This still constitutes sexual exploitation of children. So again, just a blanket statement as we're coming through the results, please view them through that lens, especially. And then Jarrett can talk a little bit about the methodology.
Yeah. So yeah, our methodology is we've used what we've started coining as more of an adaptive research methodology that was really built in collaboration with the Urban Light team, using their knowledge, their field experience from field work, as well as the rapport and trust that they've built over the past decade or more that they've been working with the communities there in Chiang Mai. So our target sample for the study were young people who sold sex or traded sex in massage parlors, bars, karaoke bars, gaming cafes, and public areas, building on a lot of the sampling mapping that we had done in previous studies, but also trying to adapt to understand how those dynamics have changed over time. We used a respondent-driven sampling, which is where we started with 12 seeds, which I will show in the next slide. Yep, there we go. We started with 12 seeds, and then allowed those 12 seeds to refer us to other people within their community. And so we were able to sort of map out sort of how those relationships went and go deeper into for access to communities we might not otherwise have access to. We used mixed methods, data collection, quantitative, descriptive, qualitative, content analysis. And that was a part of the adaptive methodology is that we sort of, we had certain instruments and tools that we implemented, and then we sort of had to look at the data and then figure out, well, how do we analyze this? What tools, what methods are best to do that? We had some challenges due to COVID-19, which I'm sure we'll talk about later. Looking at this respondent-driven sample real quick, the next slide. You see we started with 12 seeds. Not all of them were productive, but we had, we have them visualized here. This is how the different groups went. We had one group that was oversampled here a bit, and that was partly due to field communication, but we can talk about that later. Looking at ethical considerations, trying to go quickly here. We had an external board approval was secured, and this was made up of 5 local academics and professionals that we put together. We do have some challenges in particularly American IRB, just because of the context is so different, that we find that it's usually more ethical and better to actually assemble experts that are more accustomed to what is experienced on the ground in these countries, to make sure that we are authentically protecting the children involved, more so than about just our liabilities, but we're actually focusing this on making sure that the children are actually respected. So obviously we had all participants were required to fill out an informed consent form, and this was done through our an online process. The data was anonymized, and just as a note that none of the data that we're sharing today is not meant to be statistically representative of the total population. there's a number of there's still limited participation. You can see that some of our respondent-driven sample didn't go as far as what we wanted it to, and a lot of that is there are fear of legal repercussions for talking to researchers, legal immigration, as well as limited participation. Let's go to the next slide here. Findings. I think Madeline is going to lead us on this one.
Yeah, so we'll just outline, this is just an outline of some of the findings. So the research was, like we said, it was very exploratory about online exploitation. And so we really collected a bunch of data. There's so many findings that we really struggled with, like what is important to discuss with you here today. And so we'll go through just some of the findings that we found. And then the discussion is really based on sort of the main findings that we had. So as you can see here, they're separated into 4 main categories that we just wanted to go through with you. But of course, if you filled out the survey, and we'll send out that link again, if you want a full copy of the report, you're more than welcome to read the entire effort that was done and all of the findings that are in there. So just demographically speaking, I just wanted to give an overview of what the sample looked like. So, and honestly, sorry about that. We wanted to give also a caveat about the gender context, right? So we're talking about gender and sexual orientation as it happens in Thailand. The context is Thailand. And in Thailand, the separation between gender identity and sexual orientation is not the same as it is maybe in the United States or in the UK. And so when somebody identifies themselves as gay, they might be identifying themselves. So we ask them what their gender is. They identify themselves as gay. Generally, it's often assumed that they're saying that they're male, right? And so they're cisgender male. So what we found is that there was a diverse breakup of gender in the sample. About half of the participants identified as cisgender male. And then as you can see here, what is that? Like almost a fourth, but not quite a fourth, identified as transgender as their gender identity. And then another third identified as third gender. So what we ended up doing, because this was not honestly expected at the outset of data collection, we didn't expect to get this great diversity of a sample, and we really then adapted our responses and the findings that you'll see here today to this new sample. And so what we will do throughout the findings presentation is separate the findings in between cisgender males and then trans and third gender people as well who participated in the study, to see those different experiences that we know exist between these two groups. And you also see between age and gender, there is a different range based on gender, different ranges in ages. The average age was 29. So we did have a lot of people who were over the age of 18. And then the UN is a slightly higher definition of youth. So we will often refer to participants as youth, but they span a larger age range. And then I'll go through this quickly, but just a couple of notes here. There was not an overrepresentation. Most of the respondents identified as Thai nationals, and about a fourth of them identified as an ethnic minority group. There was differences in education between gender identities, whereas trans and third gender people were significantly more educated than cisgender respondents, as well as living context. Just again, to give a general overview of the sample, about 10% of respondents reported being homeless or living in a public area or shelter, and 73% of respondents reported they lived with somebody who they also lived with growing up. So a consistent, at least person that they've lived with, even if it wasn't consistent in their housing. And 20% reported living with someone who was also trading sex. So you see a sharing of lived spaces between individuals who are involved in sex trade. So,
yeah. And looking at sex trade and income. So we asked respondents to estimate. You can go to the next slide here. So looking at the trading sex and income generation, we asked respondents to estimate the money that they could earn, that they believe that the money that they earn from trading sex in an average week. The answers provided, ranged greatly and showed some interesting divergence, as you can see here, along the lines of identity. And note here as well that 2 respondents, both identifying as transgender, reported disproportionately higher incomes of this at 10,000 and 20,000 baht a week. And they were removed here for visual clarity, but because they were quite divergent. But interestingly, the 3 people who identified as gay were among the highest earners. However, those who identified as male, cis male, were among the lowest. But overall, considering like all respondents, we found that on average, people were earning about 2.5 times higher than the minimum wage. Obviously, that males though, many cis males though, as well as some the third gender groups that were considerably at the lower end of that spectrum. Get the next slide here. We asked about their reasons for doing what sort of brought them in to this work, largely, and this is across, and respondents were able to choose multiple answers here, anything that applies. Largely across the board, people said it was the ability to earn money fast. And then, we also notice among the transgender groups, we see a much more wide diversity of responses, including, I can work when I like. It's difficult to hold down another job. It's a job to make money. They enjoy this work. We also asked them about if they would stop trading sex if they had a stable income from another source. Interestingly, we found that 2/3 of them said they would, with roughly the same numbers between trans or third gender and the cis males. Nearly half. We also asked them if they ever felt that they didn't have a choice in their work for going with their customers. About half, 46%, said just sometimes they don't feel as though they have a choice. With roughly similar rates between trans, third gender, and cis males. And about 23% of all respondents said that they always or regularly feel that they don't have a choice, with also similar findings between trans and cis, trans, third, and cis male. Looking at the next slide, how did you find out about trading sex, or more specifically, from whom did you find out? You found about half of all people came into trading sex by a friend, a social relationship, someone over the age of 18. Among other things, we have online dating app, other site, relatives. Some people found out through relatives. Interestingly, males, cisgender males, were the only to indicate learning about the sex trade by a friend who was under the age of 18, which we found to be interesting as well. Looking at the next slide. So this, we are looking at the average age when the respondents started trading sex. Just one thing to notice here, we also just have a slightly younger average age among cisgender males, 25, compared to transgender, which is 27.3. And I just realized, I believe the previous slide said 29 was the average age. I believe it was actually 27.3. So sorry about that discrepancy there. But some things we wanted to point out here in the youngest age, that particularly cisgender males were the only group to have respondents that reported being under the age of 18 for the interview. Average age they started trading sex, a little bit younger as well. Average age they started selling sex online. You'll notice that trading sex, the youngest ages for in-person, it's about 13 years as the youngest age for trans, third gender, 13 for cisgender male. Similar findings for their first trading sex online, 15 for trans, third gender, and 13 for cisgender males as the youngest age, which is fairly young. Jumping ahead, the next slide here. So this needs a little bit of explanation here. The slide is a bit complicated. We tried to make it visual. So what we're doing here is we're comparing the contexts in which the respondents are generally are meeting for sex. So we have how often do you meet in person, and that's the first table there. And then the far far other side table is how often do you meet online for sex, and then in the middle it says, sometimes I meet online and then we meet up in person. So we are introduced to each other online and then we are in person. So these are different environments that sex trade takes place. We have offline, online, and then online with then offline interaction, right? So we see with meeting in person, this first one here, you see that about half of transgender respondents meeting in person always or often. About majority of males saying that they do this sometimes. But yeah, with the just being online, the majority we see about trans and males, majority meeting people online sometimes or just occasionally. So similar there, as well as online. Not a whole lot of clear patterns here. The big thing to, I think, draw from this is that there's a lot of diversity in how they're meeting, whether it's online, offline. The apps are obviously being used, but it's quite a bit of diversity there. All right. The next slide, looking at, we also ask them about a variety of issues that are concerning them. So how much are you presently concerned about the following issues? Range of responses. You can see the full data in the report, but some of the top level findings for different groups are reported here. With cis males, the top work concerns were catching COVID-19 from clients, catching HIV from clients, and disclosure of personal information. So a lot of health-related and personal identity sort of related concerns. With third gender, we see disclosure of personal information, catching COVID-19 from clients, similar, just in a different order, and catching HIV from clients. And with transgender, we see quite a bit more broad range of things. And these include, my images circulating on the internet, catching COVID-19 from clients, disclosure of personal information. Excuse this one, number 4, that's a repeat. You can remove that one. Being physically abused and being robbed. Quite a number of things, including physical, physical health-related, quite a much broader range of things reported there. And then the last 2 slides on this here that I also wanted to draw attention to. We asked about the various negative experiences that they may have had during while they're trading, when they're trading sex. And so we gave them a whole range of different things that might have happened, and also allowed them to fill in other as well. We found that basically, very similar findings between overall, we see unwanted pictures circulating on the internet, my personal information disclosed, being bullied, emotionally stigmatized by customers, catching STIs, roughly similar concerns between trans and male identity groups. However, when you going into the next slide here, when we ask them then what they do in response to those threats, that's where we start to see some a little bit more divergence here. One thing that I wanted to pull out was we noticed that trans respondents are much more likely to, or trans third respondents are much more likely to do something in response, whether it be telling a friend, informing the police, or a variety of other things. Whereas 42% of males, 40% of males simply said that they do nothing, that it's, it comes with the territory is sort of what's assumed. And then they talk some to say they would tell a friend or family. And just coming off of this and discussing a little bit of the background, we do note in like, especially in qualitative data, that there are much more formed social groups and cohesion among a lot of trans third gender groups in trading sex, as in comparison to males who often are more likely to work independently or not be aware of one another. And there are, I think, considerable safety concerns that come with that should be considered. And that's something that we want to bring up in the discussion. But going on to the next slide, I think Madeline might be carrying us on here. Oh, Glenn.
No, it's me. So we're looking at physical and emotional safety. These are really important, carrying on from what we had before. And the two that really stand out is that the number who involved in doing a video chat before they actually meet in person, the trans and third is 22 as opposed to cisgender 10. So that seems to be more important for the trans. And then for the meeting in a public place, that's 14 and 6. But these numbers are still really small when you take the total. So these different things like carrying condoms, that's something that was mentioned the most. But and making sure that you have your phone is charged and it's got credit, telling someone where you're going, and telling someone who you're meeting. All these things not considered to be very not necessarily considered to be very important, but actually really important. And so training on taking these safety measures are really very important. And it means that these are some things that can be focused on when we're thinking about doing training. And then who would you go to if you had problems now? You can see that mum is the top one for pretty much all of them, really. And then the next after that will be a friend, followed by dad. But still, even with the highest number for the mother, there's still quite a few that wouldn't go to their mum as well. So mum, friend, father. And then there's two parents, both of their parents, and then we've got down the bottom a male friend or a female friend. We're not quite sure about. We maybe should have added their transgender friend, and we didn't do that. So we're assuming that maybe some of the female ones would actually be the transgender ones. So.
Yeah. And just a note, Wade asked a really good question. So the previous slide was the actual number of participants on the bar graph. So this is the number of people who responded in that way. And these
number rather than percentage. Yeah.
And just so you know, people were able to answer more than one, like check off more than one option for these questions, which is why the numbers don't add up to 100 exactly.
Yeah. Thanks, Madeline.
Yeah. And then I will take accessing support services. So we asked a lot about really practical questions about what would sort of get you into support services. Have you ever looked into support services? Do you need support services? That sort of thing to really kind of bring it back to Urban Light's work. And so just looking a little bit at the knowledge, use, and perception of support services among the population or among the sample, only 19% overall reported that they would go to an organization, and 51% had gone to an organization at some point in their past or were currently connected to an organization that provides any sort of type of support services. We left that very broad in an attempt to kind of capture just generalized experiences with comprehensive services. The majority of the sample reported that the organization that they had gone to was helpful, but the same percentage, not exactly the same people necessarily, but the same percentage of people also reported that they felt that the organization was judgmental in some sort of way. So again, this represents a really targeted area for intervention and training. And we then asked them, okay, so in regards to the negative experiences that they have had, right, the things that Jarrett was talking about, being bullied and stigmatized and all of those sorts of things, and the lack of reporting with that, we asked participants what would encourage you to report, if anything. And the things that were noted most frequently is that they would like to be anonymous in their reporting. They would like to know that they had legal support in not being, say, arrested if they were going to report something. And that would really, those two things in particular would really encourage them to report negative incidences more frequently to people that might be able to assist them. And then we also asked about what were the challenges in opening up to service providers? Why would you maybe not tell a service provider about something that had happened? And really some of the big things were taboos around surrounding sex and sexuality, and really the strong influence of gender norms and like what's expected of you, as we saw this especially among cisgender males, like what's expected of you as a man, right? And that sort of influence on telling people and asking and reaching out for help. And then finally, we asked those who wished to leave the sex industry, right? Not everybody wanted to leave the sex industry, but in assisting those to leave the sex industry, what would service providers do? What could service providers do to help people who do wish to leave? And really one of the biggest things was providing good alternative employment opportunities, training and education opportunities. Really, the different source of stable income was kind of the biggest thing. And so that's one of our key takeaways we'll talk about in the discussion here, which I'll go into. And again, this is sort of like the umbrella theme of the entire presentation, is that we have so many things to talk about, and all of these different aspects are covered in the discussion of the bigger report, which Maya mentioned how to get that. But today, I'm just going to focus this part on 8 of the key findings that we took away from the research. So know that there's more, but this is our condensed version. It's the whirlwind tour here. So first and foremost, going back to the original aim of the study is that the use of the internet for child exploitation and sex trade is widespread and pervasive, right? That sex trade is happening online, sexual exploitation of children is happening online, and really this is not something, whereas we maybe initially thought that like there was a group of people participating in person sexual exploitation and sex trade and a group of people doing it online. That's not what we found, that overwhelmingly people were participating in both, right? And so this group is not 2 separate groups of people. Instead, it's one group of people who are using all of the resources to participate in this.
Madeline, can I just add something there?
Yeah.
When I know we've talked before about children not being able to say to give consent, and that any child under 18 is considered to be sexually exploited. I think it's really important that what we've found in all our research really is that you don't stop being you don't stop at 18. Things don't just stop. You no longer experience violence or abuse, and so that's why we when we talk about child sexual exploitation here, we also mean young adult exploitation as well, because we believe that that's just as serious, or perhaps in some ways it can be just as serious. So I just wanted to emphasize there that it's not just children of sexual exploitation, but it's also young adult sexual exploitation as well.
Great point. Yes, thank you, Glenn. So the second takeaway for us was that really the opportunities for employment, housing, and education are critical to preventing sexual exploitation and violence. So really, it is not just like getting people housing. That's not the whole solution, right? We have to look at a holistic person and the needs that they have, and the wants that they have in building a life of their choosing. And so really what we found was there was a lot of different things, like a lot of other models, that promote this comprehensive need for services, right? Services that aren't just A or B, but like A through Z, the ability to provide flexible services for people based on where they're at and what they need. We also found that physical and sexual violence were commonly reported among respondents. So we didn't go into these findings in depth, but that it was a lot of respondents, the majority of respondents reported at least one incidence of physical or sexual violence perpetrated against them. And so this remains a huge concern, and this violence can come from a lot of different sources. So again, the continued prevention of violence and advocacy for violence prevention services. We also found, as a lot of the world experienced, the COVID-19 pandemic had an inverse impact on the livelihoods of young people in the sex trade. So what we found was that, I mean, you might expect people who are, say, working in a bar and trading sex, a bar maybe that caters to tourists, might see a significant decrease in income. What we found is that everybody, through all of their variety of ways of being involved in sex trade, experienced a significant decrease and or elimination of income due to the COVID-19 pandemic, which then comes back into that whole comprehensive need for services. So really just I think the COVID-19 pandemic impact just can't be understated. We also found that gender norms and expectations present unique vulnerabilities for cisgender males and trans and third gender people from accessing and receiving support services. So there were gender-specific concerns noted by participants about why they don't access specific services. There were differences in gender based on why they wouldn't talk about certain things with different people. And so really looking into what sort of expectations we have around gender and how that creates pressure for young people. Again, we weren't able to go into these findings in depth, but we also asked about some of the things that we asked about were certain scenarios. We gave participants scenarios to look at and then asked them, is this an example of sexual exploitation or rape or abuse? And overwhelmingly, there was misperceptions of what rape and sexual abuse were that have the possibility of inhibiting the reporting and prevention of child sexual abuse. So again, a need for education and awareness raising there, as well as sort of advocacy in ways that we can promote. So potential victims wish to report crimes without their personal information being disclosed. I talked about this in accessing services and reporting negative experiences. Anonymity was one of the biggest things. Is if they could remain anonymous, we were more likely to encourage what participants reported, that they would be more likely to report negative experiences and possibly prevent that would then possibly prevent future experiences. And then finally, adaptive research methods really through this project allowed us to better map the landscape of online sexual exploitation of children. So we went into this a little bit, but while we were developing the survey, we went back and forth with Urban Light staff and clients to see what they were interested in, as well as what the researchers were interested in, and really being flexible with the research, right? The fact that we didn't get the sample that was originally thought that we would get, but through that, it still provided some valuable and diverse experiences and information that we can then use going forward. And now we have
can you just go back, Madeline, on that one? So yeah, I mean, for example, you saw was that literally half of the sample ended up being trans or third what's it called?
Third gender.
Yeah, third gender. That's the word. Yeah, and so that was actually really interesting. And it's not the group which Urban Light are currently working with, but it doesn't mean that we don't need to find out more about that group and do something to and advocate for them. And I think one of the real challenges of we found in other research we've done in both in Bangkok and in Phnom Penh is that transgender are very often completely left out. They're just not involved. Then apart from in sexual health, they receive very little services and at all. Okay, next one, please. Thanks, Madeline.
So we just have a couple of minutes. Glenn will go through the recommendations.
Yes. So we looked at different recommendations targeting at different people. So the general public, service providers, and then looking at funders and researchers. So we're going to briefly review those recommendations here. but there's a lot more again in the full report. So for the general public, I mean, really, we need to educate the public on focusing on human rights, and it's not about rescue. I mean, that's something that's come out generally, hasn't it, in the last few years when it's come to any kind of trying to address sexual exploitation. But it's really important, and of course, human rights also involves gay rights as well. Supporting boys and young men, as well as SOGIE children and young people who experience abuse and exploitation. We need to find creative ways to reach out to them and to support them. And Urban Light have been heading that up. And honestly, they're one of very few organizations that are really trying to do that with boys and young men. We need to think about how we're going to train professionals from all sectors to the particular unique needs of young cisgender men and trans third gender people. We're still seeing a lot of prejudice and discrimination. We're still seeing a lot of misunderstanding about the needs, and we need to train them so that they're aware. And we need to challenge where there's toxic masculinity. Toxic masculinity, the label, that there's been a strong emphasis on that, and the way it has an impact on women, but it also has an impact on trans and on cis men involved in sex trade as well. And we need to think about adopting ways of affirming self-identity, encouraging them in their to believe that they're unique and important and loved. Then we've looked at when it comes to service providers, we need to expand outreach and education efforts to include the online spaces. Online spaces have not really been looked adequately at. We're still a little bit regressive in the way that we've been dealing with these issues, and we've assumed that sometimes online means less risk, but actually that's not what we're finding in the findings. We need to increase the knowledge of reporting channels and available support systems. We need to make sure that people know and think about creative ways in which we can educate using social media and so on.
I think especially like being able to understand the online world, particularly the online gaming world, yes, in the same way that the youth on the ground are understanding it. Because oftentimes in the child protection sector, we talk about these things as if they're in the separate boxes, and because they're categorically different things on our end. But from the view of children and young people, oftentimes this is it's different manifestations of the same thing. And so I think adapting that kind of worldview, their worldview, to see what they're seeing is I think really important in this.
Yes, exactly. Sorry, can you just go back? Yeah. Madeline. Yeah, so I think I think for both cisgender and transgender, I think that they don't know where to go. Where can they go to get support? It's really challenging, and we need to find ways that can happen. Okay, next one, please. So when it comes to funders, we love funders. Thank you very much. Any of you who are funders, we love you so much. But we need you to invest in making flexible funding available. You know, when we do this research, we never quite know where we're going, and yet we find out some really interesting stuff. And early on we were thinking, gosh, we don't seem to be finding what we were looking for, and actually we found more than we were looking for. So there's some really positive aspects of it, and I think we need to, when it comes to in some ways we're just starting out when it comes to boys and young men. How do we deal with them? Where do we go? So there needs to be flexibility in funding. And so thank you for allowing us to do that. It works better if we can sit down with investors and say to them, this is where we're at and where we're going. And I mean that in terms of not just research, but I mean in terms of practice as well. And we need to think about online initiatives. How can we access these online apps and so on, so that we can make a difference? And I really believe that using social media, we can make connections and do education in a way that we haven't quite got a handle on yet. And when it comes to prioritizing, we need to think about multi-year funding rather than just these quick one-off. And that includes long-term commitments for housing and education. I think when it comes to any kind of care of young people, we cannot think in terms of 1 or 2 years. We have to think in the long term. Thank you. And then for researchers, we need to include children and young people in the development and direction of policies and programs that impact them. They're the experts. We say this a lot, but they're the experts of their own experiences, and sometimes we forget that. So listening to them and sitting down with them and asking them, what do they think we could do better? We can get some good information. But if you're more interested in that, that's a particular area that we're interested in. And we did some research with the Butterfly Longitudinal Research Project, and it would be and so please have a look at that. That's also available on Dignity. There was a special edition on that. We need to adopt an inclusive conceptualization of the sex industry to include both in-person and online sexual activity, and also, of course, that it's inclusive in that it includes women, men, and transgender. And third, and also when it comes to partnership, we need to be thinking about how we can develop equitable partnerships with local communities, organizations, and leaders. Then we can really see some changes happening. We need to promote open access research. We've told you before that we've tried to make our research as accessible as possible, and we believe that the future is in open access research materials and sharing our results in other ways where people can really hear it. And then going beyond publications, we need to work into funding and plans to disseminate research to broader audiences. And like I say, social media will be one of those things. Thank you.
Okay. And this is Maya.
Hi, everyone. I just shared a link to Glenn's research piece that he mentioned there with the butterfly longitudinal study in Cambodia. Thank you so much for joining us, everybody. So I wanted to talk about what all of this means for Urban Light, what we're up to, and how the findings of this research report have influenced how we're moving forwards at Urban Light. And the past few years, we started this research project in 2020, I believe. And during that period, or during the past couple of years, there's a few things happening around the world which had an impact on how long the research took, had an impact on us as an organization. We had to make some really difficult choices, let some people go, but at the same time, we also had the opportunity to kind of redesign and rethink the implementation of what we're doing. So before COVID-19 happened, and before we had to relocate to a new location with better airflow, we also used to work in sort of various prevention communities, and we've now had the opportunity to kind of rethink what is our main target group, where do we want to be working? And there haven't been massive changes to the strategy that you can see here on the screen, but there has been a refinement of who we're working with. So we're looking to work with male survivors who are already survivors or who are at very high risk of sexual exploitation, human trafficking, other forms of abuse, and the families and people who support them, or the people who have the influence to make changes in their lives. So you can see Urban Light's strategy on the slide here. The first is outreach. This is all about making those initial connections, reaching out to survivors and vulnerable boys and men in high-risk locations throughout Chiang Mai. And while we're doing that, we're not just reaching out to boys and men, but anybody who's in that vicinity, building relationships, building trust, having conversations and saying, hey, we exist and we're here to help you, trying to fill in that missing part of the puzzle to say, there is a place to go. There is someone who's willing to listen. And this is where we are. This is where you can find us. I'll talk a little bit more about how our outreach strategy has changed following the research, but I'll summarize the rest of our strategy first. Second, we have workshops, and this is something we have been doing, but it's a little bit more targeted. Our research, our workshops are aimed at reducing harm, encouraging, promoting healthy behaviors, protection and prevention from abuse, human trafficking, and other forms of exploitation. We continue to operate a drop-in center to provide the most basic and immediate needs that people have, such as a hot meal, a place to rest, internet access, a place to shower if you are experiencing homelessness, lockers, and various things that are quite attractive for people who are maybe having a difficult time, as well as on-site enrichment activities, which encourage people to really build those relationships with staff, volunteers, and just be in an environment with people who want to support them, who want to understand them, and who have the knowledge and expertise and connections to help them in whatever path it is that they choose. Next up, we have case management services, which is, really where the life-changing stuff happens, providing access to education, vocational training, employment, safe housing, healthcare, mental health support, and legal assistance. And some of that is through our network of local partners. Wherever we can't do something ourselves, we usually know somebody who can. The next point on the slide there, number 5, is stakeholder engagement. So that's building relationships with people and organizations who have the capacity to support what we're doing. So that could be anyone from local bar owners to police to local government ministries or family members. And then lastly, we have advocacy and awareness, which is what we're doing here today, raising awareness at the local level, the national level, and international level, because unfortunately we are still in the arena that requires us to raise awareness on this issue. People usually are still thinking, when you when you think of human trafficking, people's minds tend to go straight to just women and girls, and it can often be overlooked that this is happening to boys, this is happening to men, this is happening to trans and third gender individuals, it's happening to people of all genders. The perpetrators are not discriminating in that way, and so we shouldn't be either. So just to expand a little more on how the research has impacted the work that we do on the ground in Thailand, with the outreach, we are connecting with the boys and young men and all the individuals that we work with, asking them specific questions. What kind of hashtags are you using? What are the apps that you're using? Which Glenn has rightfully pointed out that we've chosen not to share here for the reasons that we want to protect boys and young men. So we're not going to be out on the rooftops shouting, this is where you can find them, these are the hashtags to use. But for our own internal purposes, It's very important, as Jarrett was saying, for us to be able to engage in online interaction in the ways and in the spaces that boys and vulnerable men and transgender youth are using them. Sorry, I'm mentioning transgender youth as kind of a footnote there, because at Urban Light we've been working in the space with males, with cisgender identifying males for a very long time. It doesn't mean that we're excluding them, excluding like the LGBT community or SOGIE-Diverse youth from coming in and receiving our services. But at the same time, there are already these amazing organizations that exist that are run by transgender individuals, by third gender individuals. And I think for us, where we are with our current capacity, it doesn't make sense for us to kind of move into that space as a whole like shift of our target group. But we are more than willing to support in whatever way that we can by sharing what we know with those groups and connecting with them, and vice versa, learning from them. So second, with the workshops that we've been doing, I think it's been very important, and we've had some success with creating easy read and jargon-free resources, and creating the time and space to explore and really understand complex topics, to break them down using flashcards, using pictures, to say, hey, these are the elements of human trafficking, and playing games, and making it engaging, because it's complicated stuff. And if your level of education is low and you maybe don't understand that what's happened to you is actually a crime, or you could even be involved in the crime that's happening to somebody else and not know that you're, culpable for that. So I think it's really important that we facilitate those conversations and make them easy to understand and engaging. Even this research, I think, is an important part that we can do to break this down, because there's a lot of information in here. For example, the safety plans, this is a workshop we can develop with and for young people, and engaging them in the process of creating those resources is also a wonderful way to get them to really understand and, be learning by doing. At the drop-in centre, we've been creating more and more opportunities for real and meaningful participation, in how providing opportunities for all of our clients, all of our service users, to get involved in having their say on what should we do, who should we work with, how should we do it, and really listening to what they say, and not having just some kind of tokenistic view of, okay, participation, check that box off, we've got kids, they did a survey, wonderful, excellent, but really listening to them and believing them that they are the experts in their own experience, that there's no way that I can ever come in and expect to understand what's going on in their world if I'm not truly listening. In terms of case management, I think in recent years we've been increasing the amount of employment training support, and also the sort of equipment support, so it's sort of providing the hardware and the software to go along with that, and making sure that services are holistic and are addressing the multi-dimensional nature of poverty and these extremely interlinked vulnerability factors that can't really be extrapolated, like we were talking about earlier, that it's not just one issue. So, okay, homelessness over here and drugs over here, and, sexually transmitted infections over here. But that we need to be looking at people as individual human beings and trying as much as we can to provide person-centered services, understanding that there is no one-size-fits-all solution. In terms of stakeholder engagement, we've been, as much as we can post-pandemic, trying to increase opportunities for local engagement for the boys and men that we work with to engage, by joining local events that other partners have been organising, and also by having the boys and men designing and implementing their own projects, which has been really wonderful to see. I think a wonderful side effect of talking about participation a lot and having these spaces to say, hey, what do you think? It really matters. What's your opinion on this project? What's your opinion on how we do this activity? Has sort of sparked a mixing my metaphors, sparked a light of inspiration amongst some of the service users that we work with, and they've been coming up and saying, I've got this idea for a football project and we want to do this, and we want to say, wonderful, run with it, let's do it. And it's not perfect the first time, but we're learning from those mistakes, and again, learning by doing, which is wonderful. So we have, boys coming up with football projects and making these really impressive connections and finding resources and inviting police and inviting people from the shelters that they grew up in. And the more they understand about the meanings of human trafficking, and the more they understand what it really means to be a survivor, the more I'm able to see this fire within them to say, no, tell them. I mean, and obviously that's not right for everybody, but just like this research brought up, there is a subset of people who do feel that they would be empowered by maybe not necessarily sharing their whole story, but by having a hand in making sure that future generations of boys and men aren't affected in the ways that they have been. And that's really wonderful to see. And then finally, we have advocacy and awareness. So as Jarrett mentioned, we're not here just to share the research report, or perhaps it was Ben. It's not just a paper exercise. All of this it's really fascinating data, but it reflects, real things that are happening to real people. And so similarly with the stakeholder engagement, we want to find safe ways to empower survivors to share their voices. And of course, there are a lot of safety concerns around privacy and consent. And while we do have a few leaders who are like, I had a conversation with somebody recently, one of our young men, we were talking about the meaning of exploitation. And he said to me, so if I was to go with the customer, I get the money, does that mean that I'm exploiting somebody? Because the word for exploit in Thai contains the word benefit, so there's a bit of a language misunderstanding there. And I was like, no, so let's look at this card game and go through this resource and explain what that really means. And we had a conversation about shame and why some people don't come forward. And he said, this happened to me, I'm not ashamed. And I was like, great, mate, you shouldn't be. You absolutely shouldn't be. I agree. No one should be ashamed. It's not at all your fault what happened. But at the same time, we want to make sure that we're protecting these individuals who, if they may feel on one day that they want to come out and shout from the rooftops, this happened to me, and I want to get on a stage and speak about it. But 2 years, 10 years down the line, how will they feel about that? So there's a lot of work to be done before we can, go around sharing people's stories, although it's great that he wants to have his voice out there in that way. But one way I think we can do that, and the way that we're starting to do that, is through putting boys and men behind the cameras. So having them be involved with, taking short videos of what we're doing at the drop-in center. And it's all, little bits and pieces that are just starting. But of course, they're much better with technology than us anyway. And so having them be in control of the narrative so that we can share their voices with you and tell you what happened and share what they want to share in the way they want to share it. So I think I've probably talked for long enough now. But I would love to move on to any questions and, answer anything that I can.
Yeah. One question that I wanted to answer, there's a question in the chat that I, for some reason, am not able to respond to in the text box, but I will verbally. Wade asked, were there any indicators in noting transgender women and transgender men? or they were all under just transgender. I imagine responses would be varying because of differences there. And in this context, yes, they were.
Sorry, I have an answer for that.
Oh, good. Yep.
I believe transgender women. Just to provide a very simple answer for that.
Yeah.
I don't believe we've had any transgender males.
Yeah. And
but do go on.
location, yeah, like the locations that we were going for, it's kind of understood in the locales that is some establishments feature, you would feature often ladyboys, which can include third gender or male to female trans people, and then other establishments generally would just feature cis males, usually marketing to males. So it's usually it's people that were assigned often male at birth, and they may identify as trans or third gender being, or ladyboy, which is roughly third gender.
And I think we would all agree that the answers would be different. So it's a good question in general, that the clarification that this would, in sort of American concepts, or it would be considered transgender women.
Yeah.
The participants.
One thing I think, going off to what Maya was saying at the end there, like the importance to really translating, the importance of acknowledging this nuance and really putting yourselves into the eyes, behind the eyes and ears of people in this context to understand, what are they hearing? What is the context? What do these words mean? What are the, it is important to understand these things, because there are massive differences between identity and how we understand all of these different inner working parts between the East and the West and within. Anyone else?
Well, I think if we have no more questions, we're happy to I put all of our contact information on there. Please feel free to contact us if there's any additional questions or anything that we can clarify or things like that. Oh, sorry, Genevieve had a question. It might be from Maya. So aside from the drop-in centers, what kind of long-term support do you offer? I think we covered some of that, but I don't know if you want to answer.
Yeah, so would you mind going back a slide, Madeline? So under here in the case management part is where we talk about some of these holistic services. So Urban Light provides scholarships and transport, food support for education, and that can take the form of formal education within regular schooling or university, non-formal education, which is a part-time, usually once a day, non-formal way of trying to work towards getting the Thai equivalent of a GED or your GCSEs, vocational training, which can be full-time or part-time, employment support that could come in the form of training, providing equipment. We've had some success with clients becoming delivery drivers, and I know that transportation is often a barrier for people who are looking to escape an exploitative situation. Housing, and the housing that Urban Light provides is not a shelter. It's not an institutional setting like that, because as you probably could see from some of the previous slides, a lot of the people we work with have come from those backgrounds, and so we don't want to be keeping people in institutions if at all possible. So the housing that provided by Urban Light comes in the form of emergency housing, which could be from one night, just to escape a violent situation, to a month as someone recovers from a health problem that's not serious enough to hospitalize them, but serious enough that they can't work, for example, or to spanning several years as someone seeks education full time. And that, comes back to the point that we were talking about earlier, which is we need long-term funding for this. It's just not good enough to be able to say, hey, yeah, we'll support you to get into education for a year, and then next year we'll talk about it and we'll see, and we need financial support for that, because although it's not expensive, these things do add up. We provide healthcare support. We have basic first aid at the drop-in center. We also can cover medical costs for any clients who go to hospital, cover the transport fees. Generally, the health costs in Thailand are not too high. People usually have the 30 baht card if they have Thai citizenship. If somebody is stateless, it can be a little bit more difficult. If they don't have Thai citizenship, the costs can be a bit higher. So Urban Light can help out with the costs on that side, and we also connect people with other organizations in the area working on health related topics, such as the Thai Drug Users Network, CareMat, M+, and organizations that are working more specifically on sexual health and preventing sexually transmitted infections. We also provide mental health support. We did used to have a full-time counsellor on staff, but unfortunately we had to make some staff cuts. So another plead for funding so that we could get some more of that. But we provide basic counselling and legal assistance. Unfortunately, usually this comes in the form of support with citizenship and ID related requests. When somebody comes in and reports a crime, we of course report that, as much as we can. But as you saw probably from the results discussed already, when it comes to the individual and their willingness to disclose what has happened to them, it's still a huge challenge. Even when we say, there's this organization who will help you, there's a network of lawyers who will work for free for your case. No, I just want to forget about it. I just want it to go away. It didn't happen. Don't want to talk to the police. Don't want to. And it's not necessarily that they have a bad relationship with the police, but they just don't want to engage. For the most part, not always. Occasionally, there are cases that we're able to support with legal assistance in that way. So those are the main services that we provide in the long term. And education and housing are probably the biggest needs that span, many, many years. I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, and if you are able to support Urban Light, you can look at this little QR code here and it'll bring you to their website. It also tells you all about the awesome stuff that they do. So, yeah. I don't know.
One thing that I appreciate, I think, just as the research methodologies are adaptive in our approach, I think also programming and just the general approach to these services, particularly in gap groups, particularly in areas where there haven't been a lot of research and work done, that there is this need for adaptive approaches that can lead with listening, lead with learning. And a lot of that has to be done through relationships and building trusting relationships, not on the ground between researchers and service providers, nonprofits such as Urban Light, but also Urban Light and those networks developing those trusting, collaborative relationships with people on the ground. That all of this sort of is relational, and in being that is adaptive. And I think that's something that we definitely want to be talking about more in the future, I think, together about what that means. And certainly this project has been a learning process for all of us in really the parameters of what adaptive responses and methodologies really mean. But it's been great, as always, working with Urban Light.
I think it was very interesting, the respondent-driven sampling. We did touch on this briefly, that we, at first, when we were looking at the sort of raw data, we were thinking this wasn't what we were looking for at all. But I think that's a wonderful finding in and of itself, is that the seeds, the original people who we reached out to, who then had to reach out to people in their own networks, took the research in a direction as it should be in respondent-driven sampling, with the clues in the name, took it in these different directions. So we saw that young cisgender males were talking to maybe one or two people only, but that included older friends and younger friends. And we also saw, it was roughly just by chance, like a 50-50 split between cisgender and then the trans and third gender community. It was just great to see sort of that demanding to be in the room, coming out of that.
Yeah.
This population that we hadn't intended as a target group, but like I say, respondent-driven sampling. So driven by them, and then also noting that there was kind of the oversampling of one individual. But that was very interesting to see that one person was able to reach out to, I forget how many, but quite a few people in their network, and the difference between the cis male respondents who could only seem to only be able to reach out to one or two people that they were connecting with, and then whereas with the trans and third gender individuals, it seemed to with the trans and third gender individuals, there was there were more respondents coming from one single person, and to me that indicated something which seems kind of obvious looking back at it, which is that boys and men, perhaps they're not as open with each other because of cultural norms and masculinity, and then it's such a taboo to be involved in exchanging sex, whereas perhaps in the it fits perhaps maybe more with the stereotypes, the gender stereotypes, that within the LGBT community people might be more open with each other. Absolutely. Who's this? Just seeing a comment coming in here.
Exactly.
Yes, that's exactly right. Yeah. Somebody's just commented, the need for transgendered people to come together as a community shows interconnectedness for survival. Absolutely. Perhaps they've already had to overcome some things and have some shared experiences in that sense, and so it's easier to open up about those things, perhaps. That was really fascinating to see.
Yeah, I think that also, not just do we see that in the respondent-driven sample and who they're talking to, but then that is reflected in the data itself, that we see, who do you reach out to if something, negative or scary happens? Males were the only ones to actually, half of them said we did nothing. We wouldn't report it. We wouldn't talk about it. Whereas, a lot of the trans third gender, groups would maybe immediately talk to their community, their clan, their because does seem to be a more cohesive community there than what you see among cis males. And I think that also goes back to the need for really exploring the other side of gender and all of the intricacies in between. Like what does it mean? What are some of those things that we don't see, those vulnerabilities that come with the package of being a man and identifying as masculine, and helping to understand that, I think is really, that's a big gap, I think, in at least in a lot of theory and in this area.